Well, hello. This is Dean Tenney. Welcome to my studio here in fabulous Las Vegas. We are explicating the content outlines that come from FINRA. And so today we're going to be doing critical function 1. The test writing committee gets together and decides what are the critical functions to being a broker, right? Critical function 1 is finding customers, no surprise. It's 9 questions, it's 7% of your exam. And we're going to be working our way through it. Now, these explications are no substitute for the lectures. We have literally 20 hours plus on these various topics. And what we're just trying to do is an intellectual inventory, kind of let you know what you're held accountable for in terms of your exam. So this is not a substitute. It's just kind of an intellectual inventory for you. So we're in critical function 1, as you see there on the screen. And I'm just going to go through this. And we'll go through the things that you need to know with 9 questions here. So critical function 1, according to the test writing committee, is that you as a broker can contact current and potential customers in person, by telephone, mail, electronic means, and develop promotional advertising materials that are within the regulatory framework and get the appropriate approvals for those. So types of communications. Well, the types of communications here, let me get a different color thing here. We have correspondence. And correspondence is to 25 or fewer retail persons. A person just means a living, breathing human being. When you take your 63, 65, 66, we have natural persons and we have unnatural persons. A retail client is a natural person. Institutional investors are unnatural persons. They're not living, breathing human beings. Anyways, if it's 25 or fewer, it's correspondence. And that means that the principal, and that's the test issue, can approve it pre or post distribution. Looks like a misspelled principal. Let's fix that. Can approve pre or post. Now, if it's sales literature, or retail communication, also known as sales literature, and it's going to more than 25 persons or retail persons, that has to be approved by a principal pre-distribution. Principal is a series 24 or a 9 or 10 who as a branch office manager can do, preliminary approval, but principal approval, pre-distribution. Now, we don't really care too much on series 7 about institutional communications because institutional investors are capable of protecting their own interests, their own assets. And so we don't really care on the test about institutional communications. Institutional communications with proper training, written supervisory procedures don't necessarily need to be approved. But the test is most about retail. Seminars, lectures, other group form requirements. Again, you probably should make sure whatever your firm's policies are on that. Product-specific advertisements and disclosures. Our next high risk one here is the options disclosure document. That's called the characteristics and risks of options. Again, let me get my different color highlighter here. I'm just looking at the clock. I'm trying to keep these explications under an hour. So we'll see how I do on this one. Anyways, our OCC disclosure document is called the characteristics and risks of options. Characteristics and risks of options. No rewards. It's all the bad stuff. Looks like I misspelled that. And that's called the OCC Disclosure Document. Very, very testable, by the way. I have to give that to you, remember, prior to account approval. So I'm going to give you that prior to account approval. I'm going to say, listen, I'm going to go back to my registered option principle. And my registered option principle is going to ask me if I gave you the OCC Disclosure Document. I highly recommend, by the way, you can hit the link and find this. And depending on when you're testing, it's a very good read. Now, I think I would definitely recommend to you go find it and read it. I mean, it's, it's test appropriate. Anyways, he's going to ask me if I gave it to you, very testable. I say yes. My registered option principle series 4 makes a preliminary approval. I call you back. I say, okay, we can do the trade, right? So I give you the disclosure document. I get the account approved, and then you can do your first trade. And then within 15 days of account approval, I need back from you the option agreement saying you read that booklet and you understood it. It's 100 plus pages and all the bad news, and there's no way you can read it while I wait. So that's why we have that time frame. I wouldn't worry too much as a municipal securities. We're just going through the high risk and the explication. So we're not touching on each and everything in the content outline. We're touching on the high risk things that I think you're going to see. So, I wouldn't worry about municipal securities in terms of disclosures, advertisements. I wouldn't worry too much about research reports, about quiet periods prior to distribution, third-party research. CMOs are derivative securities, and all derivative securities and CO are consider that. If you're going to advertise them, and you don't see much advertisements about them, but if you're going to advertise certain things like CMOs, always have to be sent to FINRA 10 days prior to first use. Now, for most advertisements, if you're a first-year firm, you file everything, all sales literature, retail communications, 10 days prior to first use as a first-year firm. As an established firm, you file 10 days after first use, except if it's derivatives or some ranking that you came up with in your own. But there are certain things that are always going to be 10 days. And CMOs are considered derivatives because they derive their performance from the underlying pool of mortgages, that cash flow. Prohibitions about interstate commerce and the rules. Again, I wouldn't worry about the rules too much as the product knowledge here. So what they're doing on here is these things, right? The 1.1 critical function, 1.2. So we're still in critical function 1. Can you describe investment products and services to current and potential customers with the intent of soliciting business? This is big, right? Do you know the various investment products that you have? As a Series 7, right? You're getting full registration. So you have, stocks and bonds and, mutual funds and options and partnerships and variable annuities. And what are some of the, things that you need to do when soliciting those types of investments? All right. So when we're doing bringing new issues to market, we're going to make a registration statement with the SEC. And remember, once we make that registration statement, we enter into what's called the cooling off period or a quiet time, which is a minimum of 20 days. And it is very testable to know what I can and can't do during that cooling off period. As you see here in the content outline, we're supposed to be doing due diligence, making sure all the information that we've provided is truthful and relevant, isn't false and misleading. And most important, we've made no omissions of any material facts. A material fact is the kind of fact that might alter an investor's decision. I saw this broker being interviewed on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, and he was asked why he didn't tell the client prospect this information. He said, I thought I'd lose the sale. That is the worst answer ever. I can't think of a worse answer than that. So I'm supposed to say, listen, it might alter your investment decision, but something you ought to know. Now, that preliminary prospectus, what I can do during the cooling off period is send you out a preliminary prospectus, also known as a red herring. Very testable. How is the preliminary prospectus or red herring differ from a final prospectus? It has no final offering price. That's very testable. Whoop. So we're going to send that out to you. Now, based on that preliminary prospectus, I can accept indications of interest known as IOIs. Remember, there's only 9 questions in the whole thing here, right? Let's just want to go back and show you. Just want to remind you, that's the challenge here. We're in critical function 1. There's only 9 questions, but the problem is we don't know what 9 questions they are. So, we basically got to go through them all. So, but anyways, I can accept indications of interest also known as IOIs, which are non-binding on all parties. Very testable to know that IOIs are non-binding on all parties. Non-binding on all parties. I'm not allowed to advertise, but I am allowed to place a tombstone. You know, a tombstone says this is neither an offer to buy nor a solicitation to sell the following securities. An offering is made only by a copy of the prospectus. Read it carefully. Do not send money. Right. So we're going to have an underwriting agreement. The underwriting agreement is amongst the underwriters. Be careful that you know the documents. They love to torment you about the various, things. The underwriting agreement is between the issuer and the underwriting syndicate. Let's just put that there. I'm trying to see here. This is the contract with between Facebook. Yeah, let me get this fixed here. Between the issuer and the underwriters. So this is the contract between Facebook and Morgan Stanley was the underwriters, Merrill Lynch, that. And then remember the underwriters are going to build their own selling group, and that's called the selling group agreement. They're going to sign up people under them. Now, remember, I have a very good lecture on this. That's not what explication is about. The idea here is not that I'm going to re-lecture all this stuff that, we spend hours on in the YouTube channel and the various lectures. But remember, selling group agreement is between the underwriters and selling group members. They're going to sign up people under them. It's called building their bracket, not testable, but. And it's very testable. No selling group members are never liable for unsold securities. Let's see. Blue Sky. Got to make sure that you have coordinated or qualified or notified. That's called Blue Sky. Now, on your Series 7, that's not a big deal. But Blue Sky are the state rules, and you can not only have to be okay with the SEC, you also have to be okay with the state administrator, the person who protects investors in that state. Now, if we're doing a full-blown, IPO, doing an S1 registration, we're going to do that through what we call coordination. But there's 3 ways to Blue Sky with your state administrator. One is coordination. At the same time, you're going through 33. You go through that. Another way to do it is qualification. That's typically used for interstate offerings. Another way to do it is notification for federally covered securities. I know you're excited. Once you're done with your 7, you're going to typically either do a 63 or a 66, in a rare circumstance, a 63, 65. And that's almost the whole exam, or at least half of the exam, all the exam if it's 63, half the exam if it's a 65, 66. And so, you'll learn all that stuff. Okay, so regulatory requirements, we're just explicating the exam, going through some high risk areas. Regulatory requirements of the IPO, I told you, you're not supposed to do anything other than during the quiet time, cooling off period. No, if we didn't have a cooling off period, the IPO wouldn't stand for initial public offering. IPO would stand for instant profit opportunity. I'd be calling you, hey man, this thing is going to be hot. So, we got to make sure that you've called me. I'm supposed to say I'm not allowed to comment on the prospects of the issue. What I can do is send you a preliminary prospectus known as a red herring. I can accept indications of interest, which are non-binding, and we can place a tombstone. That's pretty much it. So whenever there's 3 of them, you could expect an accept format. So we talked about the regulatory requirements for an IPO, initial public offering under 33. Primary financing for municipal securities. So if we're going to do a competitive deal for a municipal underwriting, we're going to have a notice of sale. That's how we tell underwriters that we're looking for help and selling the bonds. And we would publish that notice of sale perhaps, and the daily bond buyer. Say, attention bakers, attention underwriters, we're looking for help. The daily bond buyer is a newspaper widely read in the municipal market. And if it's a negotiated, it would never see the light of day, because negotiated means the issuer is just going to negotiate with the underwriter, right? I've negotiated. So those are two types: competitive, who can give us the best deal, who can raise the money at the least amount of cost, not testable, but that would be in municipal bonds, the lowest net interest cost. Or we're going to do it on a negotiated basis, where, you know, the broker dealer, the underwriter sits down with the issuer. It could be done privately. We could be underwriting bonds to do advance refunding the bonds before they pass their call date. Again, I'm not going to lecture that. That's we've got 3 hours of municipal lectures for you. You know, obviously Dean thinks they're wonderful. I wouldn't have made them, but both of them are very target rich. I'll leave it up to you to review those. Syndicate formation. We talked about the syndicate formation, and we said there's a spread, the difference between what the issuer receives, the difference. Let me get my different color again. I'm trying to. By the way, you should have this document printed out while you're going through these explications, or at least have a notepad so you can, you know, be making these notes. And again, what I'm hoping you're going to do with these is use them as a, you know, intellectual inventory, if you will, about what stuff you need to know while you're studying. And I'd be interested in your feedback about where I should put this in the playlist. Should it be at the front with the, you know, the first part of where I started telling you I was going to do this, or should it be at the back end? And then, you know, if you don't find it helpful, I mean, because obviously I'm not going to do section 2, 3, and 4 if you didn't find the explications to be helpful. But anyways, back to this. Let's see if I got red now. Test question: the difference between what the public pays and the issuer receives is called the spread. And there are 3 components to the spread. You know, the smallest component of that is the management fee. And the largest component of the spread is the selling group concession, the selling concession. Now, be careful on your exam, RTFQ, that stands for read the full question. You know, a lot of times people blow this when it comes to munis, because, you know, the munis have a thing called total takedown, and total takedown is not an individual component of the spread. The total takedown in a muni is the additional takedown and the selling concession. So be careful if I'm asking you the largest component or largest individual component, because those are different questions. But the selling concession is the largest individual component. As I just told you, the total takedown in munis is not an individual component. And then remember, the other test question here is all you receive is the selling concession. You're not at risk for unsold securities. And I would definitely know that. And a syndicate, whether it's Eastern or Western, divided or undivided, doesn't matter. Selling group members are never liable for unsold securities. Okay, pricing practices, components of the spread. We just talked about the components of the spread. Prospectus requirements, you know, what's going to be in the prospectus? Well, we said everything you need to know to make an informed decision. You know, prior to 1933, I'd say, trust me, you'll love it. You know, but President Roosevelt, all that legislation was called the New Deal. And so part of the New Deal was, you know, he changed our industry from let the buyer beware, caveat emptor, to the seller beware. We got to make sure we're doing this right. So what's in the prospectus? Financial statements, information on the issuer, any legal proceedings, the risks, all the stuff you need to make an informed decision, because that's what it's all about. And then we said the difference between a preliminary prospectus and the final prospectus is very testable. We said it's known as a red herring. It doesn't have that final offering price. We said the cooling off period, we said is testable. And we said that was 20 days. It's also known as the quiet time, meaning I'm not supposed to comment on the prospects of the issuer while they're in the cooling off period. We might, as an issuer, we might want to tell the SEC that we might want to come back and, raise some additional money. And so we would typically maybe do a shelf registration, perhaps. Official statements serve the same purpose and munis. Municipal securities, very testable, are exempt from the registration requirements of 33. So, there's not a prospectus when selling muni bonds. Now, don't tell me the official statement is a prospectus, because if you do, you're going to get it marked wrong. But it serves the same purpose. It helps you make an informed decision. That's also, in the business referred to as an OS. And it's the prospectus-like document when selling municipal securities. So the OS is the prospectus-like document. What I mean by that is it helps you make an informed decision. It says here, notice of sale. We talked about the notice of sale. Qualified institutional buyers of securities is testable. That shows up more often on the SIE than it does your Series 7, but it is under 144A. Again, let me get a different color here. Under 144A, a QIB is an institutional investor with assets under management of 100 million or more. I don't know if you saw that on your SIE. It shows up there more than it does on a 7, but And what you can do as a QIB, what you can do is buy unregistered foreign and domestic securities. For example, SpaceX is a company that launches satellites and capsules and takes people to space stations. It's privately held. None of the stock in SpaceX is registered. Besides Elon Musk, two of the other principal stockholders in SpaceX are T. Rowe Price and Fidelity. And we clear their QIBs, so they're allowed to buy unregistered stock in SpaceX. Last time I saw, Fidelity owned about 7% of SpaceX, and T. Rowe Price owned about 6%, and those are unregistered securities. You should definitely know in a Reg D offering what an accredited investor is. The Reg Ds are exempt transactions under 33, and the deal there is you tell the SEC you're not going to sell it to members of the public. And depending on what version you are, no more than 35 non-accredited investors. But ultimately, the test question is, what is an accredited investor, as you see here? And you should know this already based on your SIE, but that would be $1 million of net worth, exclusive of your primary residence. Not testable. When you pass your 7, you're going to be considered accredited. Not testable, but 7s at broker dealers are considered accredited. And you say, well, Dean, I don't have $1 million. I said, you make 200 grand for the last 2 years with the expectation of that this year? Or do you make 300 grand married and filing jointly for the last 2 years with the expectation of that this year? And then remember, it's the expectation. I guess I should put that in there. Expectation of 200K this year. And this was married and filing jointly. Same deal. Reg A. Reg A is pretty straightforward. Reg A is not Bob Marley music. Regulation A is another exempt transaction. And all you need to know for test purposes here is the most I can raise from the public using this version. Let's change colors here. Let's do something different. Let's do blue this for a while. This can be, I can only raise up to $50 million. And they don't get in on the test about tier 1 and tier 2. If I go to tier 2, then I have to start qualifying the investors, the retail investors, in terms of, liquid net worth and that kind of stuff. But the test question here is just to know that you can raise up to $50 million doing a Reg A offering. We talked about Reg D already. You should definitely know about Rule 147s. Rule 147s are intrastate offerings of securities, and the 80% test, the issuer, let's get back our different color. Has to have 80% of their business and assets within the state, and then we can only sell to residents of the state. After 6 months, not testable, but the residents of the state can sell it to someone else 6 months later in as a secondary transaction, and nobody cares about those transactions. We're talking about the Series 7. We're explicating Section 1 or Critical Function 1 of the 9 questions in Critical Function 1 on the content outline provided by FINRA. By way of reminder, sometimes people say, well, Dean, how do you know that's not on the test? I say, well, listen, they're not allowed to start randomly testing you on stuff. If they're going to test you on something, it has to be within the content outline. If it's not on the content outline, they're not allowed to ask you about it. Now, the flip of that, if it's here, they're allowed to test you on it. Now, ultimately, though, a free question for you later on will be that Rule 147, while it's exempt under 33, we don't have to make an S1 registration statement, do the cooling off period, all that stuff. It's not exempt from state registration. And so we're going to have to qualify. We're going to use qualification to register this with the state. Yeah, that's more of a blue sky question for your 63, 65, 66 that it is for the exam we're talking about. Private placements, we've talked about private placements. In general, the SEC and state administrators don't really care about resales. What they care about primarily is primary transactions where the issuer is receiving the money. But we did say that you can resell a 147 to a non-resident after 6 months. And in a private placement, you're receiving unregistered securities. So if you accept that Reg D private placement, the securities you own are unregistered. And I would tell you it's very testable to know what is the first rule about how do we turn unregistered securities into registered securities. And the way we do that is you have to hold it for 6 months. Again, I'm trying to put the stuff that I'm telling you in different colors than what's actually in the the content outline. So I said, ooh, where'd you get the stock? He said, Dean, I got it on a private placement. And I said, ooh, that's pretty cool. Have you held it for 6 months? Because if not, you can't sell it in what happens typically is we raise the money privately, the company goes public, you wear it on the private placement. Now you have these unregistered shares and you want to sell them, you want to dump them. Non-registered foreign securities sold to institutions qualified in the US. Do you remember who those are? Remember that? Non-registered. I said unregistered. That's that whole thing about 144A. Let me get my different color here. And I said 144A, remember, is that QIBs can buy unregistered foreign and domestic securities, right? Here, non-registered. We had a Chinese bank that, raised $600 million in the US, and they did that using 144A. They sold it to qualified institutional buyers of securities. Again, that would be T. Rowe Price, Fidelity. They have AUM of 100 million or more. So that's what that means. Foreign securities are prohibited from being sold to U.S. investors. So, if you're, have a foreign security, you can't sell to U.S. investors unless it's registered or it's an ADR or something like that. And again, we're just going through the critical functions here. All right, well, that's not so bad. That's section 1. The planning is here. So let me just get out my highlighter here or my annotation tool. And so, I kind of went through earlier in our time together, assuming you're watching the channel, I went through this thing and then we told you about what the exam was. And I said I was going to start doing explications of these various things. And so today what we did was, my annotation tool looks like it's acting up. Let me just do it without using my, what we did today was we went over this section here. Only 7% of your exam. That's probably where we're coming in earlier than I'd like. Again, let me know. I'm going to plan on doing section 2 Section 3, that'll be a doozy, right? 91 questions in section 4. And my original plan was to do section 3 first, but I thought I probably should do them in the critical function order, right? So the test writing committee says critical function 1 for you is a baby broker. Baby broker is not a derogatory term. It's a term of endearment. But as a baby broker, first critical function is finding customers. The second critical function, by the way, this is sequential, right? And this is what we'll do in our next explication, is opening accounts, obtaining and evaluating customer financial profile, investment objectives, so we can determine suitability. We'll do that in the next explication, 11 questions. And then the biggest part of your exam, I think makes sense, is that you provide customers with information about investments and you make recommendations. That makes sense that that's 91 questions because that's the test writing committee thinks that's the most important critical function of being a broker. Now, in that same category, very small part of that category is transferring asset and maintaining records. That's a very, very small part of that 91 questions. The vast majority of those questions are stocks, bonds, mutual funds, options, REITs, partnerships, and we'll be doing that when we explicate critical function 3. And then critical function 4 is, you place a trade. You buy some of this stuff, right? So you verify the customer's purchase and sales, and that'd be critical function 4. So again, let me know if you find these explications helpful, because if not, I'll just hit the delete key. These things will disappear and I won't take the time to explicate the rest of the critical functions. Please note, ladies and gentlemen, this isn't a substitute for spending the time you need to in your study materials and the lectures. So this is just an added little thing I thought I'd add to the channel. I don't know what to call it, as a little bonus thing, or to just kind of let you know when you're studying what it is you're going to be held accountable for. All right, I'll see you in the next lecture.